Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. Currently, I'm a member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee. I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with MS experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions in the chat box. MS navigators are online throughout today's program, answering questions and connecting you with resources. I'd like to acknowledge and thank today's premier national sponsor, EMD Serono. Support from MS community partners helps the National MS Society reach its goal of providing up-to-date information and support through programs like Ask an MS Expert. Managing MS is much more than receiving a disease-modifying therapy. It can also mean designing new strategies to optimize your health and your wellness. Today, we're talking about art and music therapy and the role they can play in improving cognition, motor function, and self-esteem while enhancing neurological function for people living with MS. And we've invited a panel of experts to join us. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Meera Rastogi, a licensed psychologist, board-certified registered art therapist, certified group psychotherapist, and a professor of psychology at the University of Cincinnati, Claremont College. Dr. Rastogi currently oversees the University of Cincinnati's pre-art therapy certificate program while teaching psychology and art therapy classes. And Dr. Rastogi also runs art therapy groups for people with movement disorders and multiple sclerosis at the University of Cincinnati Gardner Neuroscience Institute. Veronica DeNoma is also joining us today. Veronica is a licensed independent social worker at the University of Cincinnati Health, Waddell Center for Multiple Sclerosis. As an MS social worker, Veronica assesses and identifies patient needs and barriers to care. She advocates on behalf of patients and families and provides brief counseling and social work interventions relating to adjustment to illness, material assistance, community and financial resources, employment issues, and the Social Security disability process. In 2019, Veronica collaborated with Dr. Rastogi in developing the MS Art Therapy Group at the Waddell Center. And finally, we're being joined by phone by Betsey Hartman. Betsey is a board-certified music therapist with an advanced practice in neurologic music therapy. She's the director and founder of PNW Music Therapy, a Seattle-based company dedicated to bringing the healing benefits of music to others. In 2015, Betsey partnered with Swedish Medical Group to develop and lead their flagship music therapy programs. Betsey is a music therapy practicum supervisor. She served as a board member of the Music Therapy Association of Washington State and collaborates regularly with national organizations to share her expertise. Recently, Betsey partnered with Bristol Myers Squibb and the American Music Therapy Association to help create MS in Harmony. And to begin, I'd like to invite Dr. Rastogi and Veronica to join me, and I want to thank both of you for being with us today.
Hi, John.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome again.
Thank you for having us.
Art therapy combines talk therapy with the processing of visual images to help to uncover thoughts and feelings that individual can't immediately verbalize. According to the American Art Therapy Association, art therapists can use sessions to improve cognitive and motor function while also improving self-esteem and self-awareness. Dr. Rastogi, can you help us understand exactly what art therapy is and what it isn't?
Sure. So in art therapy, we're mental health professionals. And so like John said, we use art making and the art images to help people either express their emotions that might be hard to articulate or hard to describe, and also to help people problem solve. So with the images clients make, we might help patients or clients think through things differently and problem solve. And then, of course, as many people know, art making can be incredibly relaxing and self-soothing. So it can help you regulate emotions and can also help distract you at times in a healthy way. And so that's what art therapy is. What it is not is it's not a way that we read into or interpret something about the way you've drawn something, and we don't use art to diagnose people, which is often a common stereotype. So.
What types of patients benefit from art therapy?
I would say as long as somebody's open and willing to use art materials. So, I could make tons of money if I took $1 for every time I've had somebody say, I'm not an artist, I don't do art. You don't have to be a good artist at all. You don't have to have any art experience. You just have to have that little bit of openness to try something new. And so if you're willing to try something new and just kind of trust the experience and put pen to paper or brush to paper, you are a great client for art therapy.
You oversee art therapy groups for people living with MS. And one of our viewers, Ashwin, wants to know what he can expect to experience at his very first art therapy session and how these sessions might progress over time. So I'm wondering what types of materials and what's the process that someone can expect to use during art therapy?
Sure. And so a group art therapy might be a little bit different than an individual therapy session, and both are available forms of art therapy. And so what I'm primarily doing now, what Veronica and I do is we co-lead group art therapy. And so ideally, the art therapist would have quite a few different types of supplies, and people tend to be attracted or comfortable with all different types of supplies. So usually we would have anything from something that's more fluid or less controlled and kind of evokes more emotions in people, something like paint. So we'd have that as a selection versus something that is more comfortable and controlled, like pencils or markers. And so usually we'd have a range of materials. And the session would look like usually a brief 10-minute meditation to help you get focused and slow down and kind of move you from the rush of the day to becoming more internal and then after the meditation, we would do an art prompt where usually I have some kind of art idea to get started with. And then we'd spend about 20-30 minutes making the art piece. And then there would be sharing in the group. Or if you're meeting one-on-one with an art therapist, you would talk more about the image and work with the image more one-on-one.
Veronica, today clinical social work interventions often transcend the bounds of traditional talk therapy. Can you tell us about your role in art therapy groups for people living with MS?
Sure. Well, what I do from the standpoint of the Waddell Center is I create the awareness to patients. So I bring the word to them and to the providers and always remind them, hey, we offer the art therapy for our patients. So always creating the awareness and the marketing side of it and explaining, what it is we do, how it's operated. And then as I talk to patients throughout the day, throughout the week, I can sense somebody that might really benefit from it and introduce them to it. And within the group itself, Meera and I do a good job, I think, of bouncing off one another. I mean, I think we've been doing this now for a while, that we can read each other's mind at times, and she'll ask a question and then, you know, I'll pick up on it. So we do a good job of working back and forth together. But I also bring the piece too of, as a representative from the Waddell Center and knowing the patients, I might know some of the situations and physical issues that patients are having.
Rochelle is one of our viewers, and she wants to know how she can access an art therapy group. She's wondering whether they're offered virtually, in person, or is this something she can do at home?
Sure. Yes, yes, and yes. She can access out in the community. One way she might want to just get started is contact the American Association of Art Therapy, and she can locate a therapist that way. They have what's actually called a therapy locator on their website. In addition to that, and just locally in reaching out, she may want to reach out to her neurology specialist, her MS specialist, ask if they know of anyone, maybe the hospital, local hospital, or the local university, college where they might teach pre-art therapy or art therapy. Those might be some good resources.
Lila wrote in and mentioned that she's a terrible artist, but she's open to trying something new. Does someone have to be good at art or especially creative to participate in art therapy?
And I would say, yeah, go ahead.
No. Well, Meera, you touched on it already a little bit, is not at all, but you're right. We could both be really rich if we had $1 or even 5 cents for each time we heard that. Because that's one of the biggest things is, oh no, I don't have a lick of art ability in me. And I'm one of those that have always said that. But you don't need any art experience, because it's about the process, not the piece. And it's about just allowing yourself to be vulnerable, you know, put yourself out there and trust in the process. And a lot of what art therapy is about is trusting that relationship with Meera, or whoever your art therapist is, and the members of a group, if you're doing it in a group, because we really, you know, reinforce and know that it's a no judgment zone. Everybody is there individually for themselves and to what benefit they can gain from it. They're not there to judge at all.
Is art therapy something that's typically covered by insurance?
Well, fortunately for us, we haven't had to bother with that, because we've been fortunate to have all of our supplies and everything covered by a donor, a very generous donor at the Waddell Center. And then in collaboration with the University of Cincinnati, we've been very fortunate to have Meera with us, who also brings a couple of students. So we're really fortunate in that way. With regards to actual insurance coverage, it really depends on what the credentialing and licensing is of the therapist. For instance, Meera is a licensed psychologist who also is a certified and licensed art therapist. So in that way, while she is providing art therapy, she can also provide other mental health modalities. So she would be covered. However, if it's someone who is strictly art therapy certified and directed, they may not be covered by insurance. So, but check with your insurance first.
Dr. Rastogi, I know you've looked at the research on the effectiveness of art therapy interventions. So what does the research tell us about that effectiveness?
So there is quite a bit of research on art therapy, despite some people think this is a new treatment, and it's really existed since probably the 50s, 60s, 70s-ish. So a lot of people aren't aware of that. The only issue is a lot of the studies are either case studies or they're 1 or 2 studies. So there is not a lot of research on art therapy for MS, although there is a recent research article that was published that's pretty interesting, where an art therapist had people with 2 different types of MS do drawings. And through the drawings, there was a significant difference between, let me see if I can get this right, progressive MS versus the relapse remitting in the some signs of that are typically found with people who are depressed. And so that was a pretty interesting study, that the drawings were able to detect that difference. But in general, there is quite a bit of research that says art therapy does decrease anxiety levels. It does improve people's self-esteem. There has been some research saying that it helps people remember more details, and that's possibly due to it helps kind of people organize their thinking. It definitely increases a sense of connection when it's done in a group or community setting. It gets people activated, behaviorally active, and that tends to help people feel better. There has been some neuroscience research, which is pretty interesting, that says engaging in art activity stimulates the part of the brain that tends to be active when we are internally focused and like in a meditative state. And so if you want to be really fancy, it's called the default mode network. I'll make myself sound super smart. And so that they found that this network gets activated when people engage in artwork, which may be part of why art therapy helps people reflect and gain awareness, because it's stimulating that internal state. Art therapy has been shown to improve the eyesight and gait in people with Parkinson's. And so there's been some really new research just in the past few months that have been published about that. But a lot more could be done with research in the MS community with art therapy. But all of those positive effects of art therapy, Veronica and I have seen in our group. And have received feedback from people participating in the group.
Paul is another one of our viewers, and Paul's curious about the types of specific MS symptoms that can be managed through art therapy. Dr. Rastogi, can you talk about the emotional and physical symptoms that can be addressed, and how you measure effectiveness for someone who's living with MS?
Sure. And so we all know that depression is highly found at high rates in the MS population. And so there is quite a bit of research that art therapy does help increase people's self-esteem, which we often know is often lower in people who are depressed and people who have an illness like MS. And so it can help improve people's self-esteem. It can also help people express the anger and the grief at getting a diagnosis like MS, because MS can affect so many aspects of a person's life. Giving people an avenue to express that and name that can be a pretty powerful tool. It can also become a form of self-care for people. So oftentimes people can get depressed and down. And so Veronica and I have seen people who start off in the art therapy group and get so stimulated that then they start creating art on their own, or they start getting more involved in other kinds of art. And so they realize that they like it, and they never realized that they would have liked creating art. And so we definitely have seen the art therapy group be a catalyst for something that becomes an even larger positive activity for people. So a way we could measure things is using something like a pre and post assessment, a depression scale, an anxiety scale, social connectedness survey. So just a few questions that you would give people it could be at the start and end of each group, or at the start of the 8-week group and at the end, and compare those.
Well, why don't we take a few minutes and transition from the theoretical to the practical here, and why don't we experience art therapy? Dr. Rastogi, I will leave it to you experts to handle that.
Okay, and Veronica, feel free to chime in here. And so I just want to preface this that I made this art prompt fairly, what do I want to say? Fairly positive, because you know, I'm not your art therapist, and we're on this program, and so I just wanted to do it so it wouldn't bring up a lot of things. So just know that if you do engage in art therapy, it probably will have more art therapy prompts that are a little bit deeper. So usually I start with a short meditation, and so if you're listening, if you want to go ahead and just gather whatever art supplies you have around you. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. If you just have a piece of your printer paper, because I know I have that right over here, a piece of printer paper and a pen, a marker, pencil, anything, just something simple. And once you have your paper and some tool to work with, if you just want to go ahead and get comfortable in your seat and just put your feet on the ground and just kind of feel yourself getting grounded in your space. And if you just want to close your eyes, and while you're closing your eyes, take some really deep breaths where you fill your belly. And we're just moving from the stimulating conversation with John to going inside to your inner space. And I just want you to think of some place you find relaxing. Think of a space that just helps you want to take in a big breath of fresh air, and you just feel yourself really relax and kind of you let your body slowly stop tensing itself. And I just want you to think about, what does that place look like? How does it smell? How do you feel in that space? What colors do you notice? And just really envision yourself in that calm, relaxing, soothing space. And when you have that space in mind, when you're ready, you can open your eyes and you can just draw or create what you saw. And I just want to remind you, you do not have to create a landscape masterpiece. You can use shapes, colors, lines. You don't have to actually draw a landscape. It could just be shading the color or creating a shape that represents how you felt in that space. So it can be as simple or as complex of an art piece that you want to create. And so once you have that created, I would normally give people about 20 to 30 minutes to create that if we had an hour and a half to work together. And then once they got that image created, we would share about that image. And so I have a little image that I did in one of our groups, and I can just show you that. And so I love going on walks. Veronica's heard all about my walks, and I love the greens and the yellows. And so normally, and I'll talk a little bit about this, or I can talk a little bit about this more, is what's nice about art therapy is you have this visual image from something you've done in session. And then if it's something positive, I usually tell the patient or the client, keep that picture up during the day and remind yourself of that calm space. And when you're feeling tense, try and see if you can take yourself back to your walk outside, to the green surroundings, and feel the color and the sun on yourself, and see if that can help center you and relax you. And so that's one thing I really like about the images, is they can remind you all day long, all week long, of that nice, calm space. And so, nice.
That's great.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you, Veronica and Dr. Rastogi. That was really interesting. And now, why don't we transition from the art world to the world of music? I'd like to invite Betsey Hartman to join me. And just a reminder, Betsey's going to be joining me by phone. Welcome, Betsey.
Welcome, John. Thank you for having me.
Happy to have you join us today. The use of music to improve people's physical, mental, and emotional health and well-being has quite a long history. In the last few decades, the development of neurological music therapy techniques has spurred the use of music therapy to enhance neurological functions like walking and speech in patients with conditions that affect the central nervous system, including MS. Betsey, can you describe music therapy for us and maybe share some of the techniques that are used?
Of course. So music therapy is a clinical activity that uses music interventions to help address therapeutic goals. So what does that mean? Music therapists are using things like singing, songwriting, listening to music, and even playing music to help address things like walking, speech and language skills, and even cognition, like improving memory.
So does someone have to be musical to participate in music therapy?
That is always the first question I get asked, and the answer is no. Just like you don't have to be an athlete to participate in physical therapy, you don't have to be a musician. You don't have to have any background in music or experience or competence in music to participate in music therapy.
Paul contacted us, and Paul said that he really only likes one specific type of music. And he isn't sure if music therapy would be right for him. So can personal music preferences be incorporated into music therapy sessions?
Yeah, that is a really great thought. And as music therapists, we're all trained in bringing in a patient's personal music preferences into the work that we do together. We know that everyone identifies with music differently. Something that can be really meaningful and comforting and soothing to me, for example, might be a real trigger for someone else. And so when I'm working with a patient, I'm always assessing their goals. What are they hoping to accomplish and work on? And then using my background in incorporating the fundamental components of music into our treatment plan, I'm also incorporating the patient's preferences. Paul, for example, what is his preferred music? What does he like? Why does he like it? And then educating Paul about how he can use that therapeutically for himself.
So what are the particulars of music therapy? Can it be offered to groups or to individuals? And can it be done virtually or only in person?
Well, we've definitely learned this past year that it can be done virtually. And for that, I am very thankful. In my personal practice, I lead both weekly music therapy groups for people living with MS, and I also work with people individually. So as you can imagine, the group setting, we're working on broad goals. We're addressing things like motor, speech and language, and cognition, usually with an overarching theme of building confidence, boosting mood, and helping build insight to some of the difficulties that somebody might be experiencing. And then in the individual setting, we're going a little bit deeper. How can music therapy really address this individual's goals, and what unique interventions do they need to work through that?
One of our viewers, Claudette, mentioned that she's experiencing several new symptoms and her doctor recommended music therapy to help her cope. So what can Claudette expect at a music therapy session? What happens?
Right. So first of all, I would say that it's great that her doctor recommended music therapy. And my next question would be for her, she's experiencing several new symptoms. What are these symptoms? What's going on? So as a music therapist, we're trained to assess our patients and also collaborate with their interdisciplinary team. So speaking with her doctor to gauge and get a better idea of what Claudette is experiencing, and then from there, talking to Claudette, okay, what's going on? And then after that, determining how might music therapy support her. Is she experiencing irregular gait patterns? Okay, this is how music therapy can support her. Is she experiencing anxiety or depression? Okay, here's what we can do to help support her.
Research has shown that the potential benefits of music therapy include improved emotional well-being and quality of life, improved coping, self-efficacy, energy, memory, and movement. It's a lot of improvement. Music therapy also has been shown to help reduce pain and stress in people with MS. Betsey, can you share some of this research with us and explain how music therapy impacts MS symptoms and provides some of these other emotional benefits?
Right. This is one of my favorite things about music therapy and why I love this job that I get to do. I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, when I'm facilitating a group session, we're always covering these three domains: motor, speech and language, and cognition. But interwoven throughout those three domains that we're working on addressing using music therapy interventions, we also have themes, like I just talked about, themes of boosting self-awareness and confidence, themes of helping people feel supported by other individuals living with MS in the community. And so that's really exciting that music therapy has the ability to kind of touch on all those platforms. And that's really what the research is showing us now, is that not only can music therapy help improve gait, but it can also help with depression. And, one study I wanted to mention was several years ago, they did a study on people living with MS using rhythmic auditory stimulation, which, think of a metronome, like a bum, 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 rhythmic auditory stimulation, where you have that direct auditory input and you can't help but have a direct motor output. Think of, you hear music and you start tapping your foot, right? And so they did this study saying, okay, if people living with MS use rhythmic auditory stimulation at home for 2 weeks, what's going to happen to their gait patterns? So they trialed it out. Some patients received rhythmic auditory stimulation and some patients didn't, and they had their parameters set into place. And what they found is that the patients and the people living with MS who used rhythmic auditory stimulation, their gait improved. They found more regularity in their walking, improved symmetry, and even endurance and strength. And that's super exciting. And it's actually work that I'm doing right now at the Swedish MS Center in Seattle with our rehab team. I work specifically with a music therapist, and we are currently studying if rhythmic auditory stimulation and HIIT, high intensity interval training, can improve people's gait patterns, people living with MS and their gait patterns. So stay tuned for the results on that research, but we are hopeful and optimistic that we'll get the results we want to see, which is that rhythmic auditory stimulation and HIIT training will improve gait patterns.
Well, these are some pretty exciting benefits that can be derived from music therapy. Do these benefits that you gain, do they really last?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's going to vary for each person, the amount of work that they put into their therapy, just like anything. So my goal as a music therapist is to always provide a meaningful, in the moment contact with patients. So whether it's a group session or an individual session, I want to give them something that can help them see immediate benefits. But also, I'm working at educating people on how to use music so that they can see the lasting benefits of this therapy. One simple example is I have a patient who has gait irregularities, and she's learned from me that music can help her continue walking. And so whenever she's in a place where it's difficult to walk, she's feeling that deep fatigue and just doesn't feel like she can keep her body moving, she pulls out her phone, puts her headphones in, and listens to a song. And it's that song, through the lyrics and the tempo and the beat, that actually helps her continue to propel her movement and her walking. And so for her, I would say yes, the benefits are definitely lasting. She's been doing this for years, and I know she'll keep doing it for years to come.
And is music therapy covered by insurance?
Yes, it is. As always, you need to talk to your insurance provider to learn about the details for that. But definitely, if you're working with it's in a private practice and you're seeking a music therapist, there are ways to get music therapy covered. My work here at the Swedish MS Center, similar to what we learned about with art therapy, is covered through philanthropic funds. And so we are thankful for support, because all the patients here receive music therapy free of charge.
And how does someone go about finding a board-certified music therapist?
Yeah, so you can find a board-certified music therapist through a few different ways. Always checking in with your healthcare provider, your clinic, wherever you regularly receive care. If they don't have any suggestions for you, I always recommend that people go to the American Music Therapy Association. So that's musictherapy.org. And that is our national association. It has so many great resources on that site. And you can also find where a music therapist is located near you.
Well, we've just experienced what art therapy is all about. Betsey, can you take us through a short demonstration of music therapy?
Of course. Okay, so I want to talk with you about a few different things. And I just want you to keep in mind that you're not going to get the full depth and breadth of what this intervention might be like if I were your music therapist working with you. But I just want to give you a little bit of an insight of what you might experience if you are seeking support from a music therapist. So I'm actually going to pull out my ukulele here. Let me give it a strum to see if you can hear that. Can you hear that okay, John?
We absolutely can.
Okay, great. So I'm holding my ukulele with me, and something I mentioned as I was talking are the fundamental components of music. So what does that mean? It means rhythm, tempo, pitch, and dynamics. Those fundamental components of music are the elements of music that help us improve and maintain motor skills, and that also help us improve cognition and speech and language. But today, I want to focus on the use of beats per minute to improve motor skills. So BPMs are something that you hear in a song. So think about your favorite song. Maybe you're already starting to sway back and forth in your seat as you're listening to it. There's a beat, there's a tempo, there's a flow to it. That is your BPM. Sometimes, dependent upon what the song is that you're listening to, it can be kind of tricky to identify that beat. But let me see if I can help you figure it out. And for simplicity's sake, we're going to use a song that most people may be familiar with. Let's try I've Got Peace Like a River. Maybe you know that one, but I just want you to see if you can, as you're listening along, find the beat. Maybe you tap along with your toe. Maybe you find yourself swaying back and forth or creating a gentle tap on your leg. So go ahead and take a listen and see if you can find that BPM, beat per minute. Notice if you're tapping your toe. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. Peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. So I counted out the beats a little bit there at the end, but hopefully you were able to get a pulse on finding that beat, feeling that rhythm driving forward. And then how would you use that to help you move? Listening to a song that's appropriate for you, whatever your gait pattern. Maybe you walk way faster than that. Maybe you're walking much slower. Wherever you're at, finding music that's around your average general speed, listening to that to help you propel your movement. So that's how you can use BPMs to help improve your gait.
That was great. Thank you, Betsey. And
You're
please
welcome.
stay with us for a moment while I invite Dr. Rastogi and Veronica to join us again on camera. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And I'm sure Veronica is going to pop up in a moment. Well, just to get us started here, you've all shared some great information and insights about art and music therapy, not to mention real-time live demonstrations to really allow us to experience what these things are all about. So I'm hoping you'll share your top 3 takeaways that you'd like our audience to remember. Dr. Rastogi, why don't we start with you?
So I would recommend that you just find some way to engage with art. Like, this is kind of the least resistance possible, the easiest way to get started. You might go to your local library. There's lots of YouTube videos, and even, I'm ashamed to say, TikTok videos that have art therapists or people just creating art, and you can experience some of the soothing ways of even just watching people do artwork. I'd also tell people to check out Mindful Art Studio. It's an art therapist who has this great website, and she often offers free resources and ways to just get you started in working with art. And then I think putting your toe a little bit more deeply in the water. Veronica suggested going to the American Art Therapy Association, and I'm so glad Betsey gave the website to the Music Therapy Association. So the Art Therapy Association is arttherapy.org, and you can find the art therapy locator there where you can find an art therapist in your community. And Veronica also gave you some other great ideas of how to find art therapy groups that might be available to you, or doing a Google search. And then I'm trying to think of a third way. Veronica, maybe you have a great takeaway.
Well, one idea I had was, if you're in an area and there isn't anything offered, maybe connect with, some of the MS support groups, or talk to your healthcare provider, your specialist, and say, hey, we heard about this really great therapy that we would like, so be an advocate for yourself and see if, grassroot it, see if you can get something started.
I love that idea.
Great idea. Betsey, how about you? 3 takeaways that you'd like our audience to take with them after our session today?
Yes, my takeaways are just to remind everyone that you don't have to be musical or have confidence in music to engage in music therapy or to use music as part of your care as someone living with MS. Also, something simple that you can do at home is create a healing playlist. And that just means think about what you need support with. Are you dealing with depression? Are you having difficulty sleeping? Is it challenging for you to wake up and have energy in the morning? Identify what's going on and then create a playlist with songs that might help support those things. You don't have energy in the morning? All right, you're going to need music that boosts your mood, that has maybe fast, uplifting tempo and lyrics to kind of get yourself going in the day. Having that music organized and set aside so that you can use it when you need it is the best thing you can do for yourself. And then also, if you haven't heard about music therapy, or if you're hearing this and feel like this might be something that can really help you or someone you know living with MS, check out musictherapy.org. See if you can find a music therapist near you. And also, I'd recommend that you would look into msandharmony.com. There are so many great music therapy resources specifically dedicated to people living with MS and their care partners. So go ahead and check that out too.
Great takeaways. Thank you all. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Let's continue answering some of the questions we've been receiving from our viewers. Matt recently started attending art therapy sessions to help manage the fears he has about his future living with MS. And he's curious about whether different therapists would interpret his art in different ways. Dr. Rastogi?
Well, first I would tell Matt that the art therapist should not be interpreting his artwork. We really see, although this program is about us being experts, we really see the patient, our client, and Matt, you are the expert of your own work. So different art therapists may ask different questions, just like any therapist might ask different questions. Some might focus on your family, some might focus on your thinking, but we're not going to interpret it because we're going to engage in a conversation with you to see how you, the expert of your own artwork and your own life, how things resonate with you.
Keith got in touch to say that he thinks his whole family could benefit from participating in music therapy together. Betsey, is that an option?
Yes, this is definitely an option. Bringing music therapy into not only your own care, but your family's care as well, learning how you can use music therapy techniques together can be extremely beneficial and actually help people with retaining all the information and resources that they're learning when they're working with a music therapist. So music therapy for the whole family is always a great idea.
And Betsey, I have another question for you from Lance. He's wondering if there's a certain type of music that he should listen to that would be perhaps more helpful to him than other types. What do you have to say?
Oh gosh, well, that's a really hard question because like I talked about earlier, everyone's preferences and likes and dislikes with music varies so much. And so what I tell people is you have to come back to yourself and knowing yourself and thinking about what goals are you trying to support? Are you trying to help with your sleep? Are you trying to boost your mood? And then start thinking about what lyrics, tempos, genres of music might help you address those goals.
Paulette told us that she has MS, but she also deals with high blood pressure, depression, and she's a bit overweight as well. And Paulette's wondering if art or music therapy can help manage some of these other conditions, these comorbidities, in addition to her MS. I'll really turn this over to each of you. Dr. Rastogi, what do you have to say to Paulette?
I would say because art can decrease stress and can relax people, it would definitely help her. Obviously, like Betsey was talking about, we'd want to work with a multidisciplinary team and work with a variety of interventions, but I definitely think it could be something that could help relax her. It might also be a way to help her develop more positive ways to cope and deal with things in her life that could then have these positive physical health results.
Veronica, anything to add?
Sure. I think, like we talked about earlier, I think almost anybody can benefit from these therapies. So many aspects of it: the mindfulness, the calming, what we have found in our group is the camaraderie. Because with isolation and it brings low self-esteem, but if the camaraderie helps that, and then it trickles into all aspects of life, as far as reducing blood pressure, all those benefits.
And Betsey, maybe you can give us the perspective of music therapy. Can it help manage some of Paulette's comorbidities?
It definitely can. And I would really echo what has just been said is that music therapy is able to meet every individual where they're at. I'm always, I work with people living with MS, but that doesn't mean that that's the only thing they're struggling with or dealing with at that time. And so we really take into account the full person, both mentally, emotionally, physically, and from there create the best treatment plan and resources that can support them.
Well, I want to thank all of you who submitted your questions today, and thank you, Dr. Meera Rastogi, Veronica DeNoma, and Betsey Hartman for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. For information and resources on MS, please visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends, ways for you to get involved, and you'll hear about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please remember that a recording of this webinar will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us again next week for another edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webinar is important. So you'll see a survey pop up in a moment when we close out the webinar. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to that survey pinned to the comments section. And on YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Meera Rastogi, Veronica DeNoma, and Betsey Hartman, and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.